Hey, so a little bonus video for today. I was not planning on doing this, but Black Kite just dropped this tweet about a couple minutes ago. Anyway, this is about basically Suzuki implying that the next Dynasty Warriors mainline game is not going to be open world. So basically, the Cliff Notes is he says that they're not going to do an XL because there are no plans. I know that there was that lawsuit with Capcom that they supposedly lost. I think that's probably the real reason. But then they also have the obvious point of DW9 didn't get received well by people who expect the usual Muso, and there are strong criticisms, but also there are praising voices. I think we may have derived and broadened our rage too much on the challenge. Open world may perhaps be no longer adopted in future numbered titles. However, basically doesn't know what to do for the next one. He wants to try it again. My personal opinion for Dynasty Warriors 9 2 is that such a route is also possible. I hope he can announce the 20th anniversary celebration title soon. By the way, it is not just one title. So basically, what you can derive from this is that they seemingly are going to throw away the open world, and it basically all but implies that, or all but confirms that, whatever we're going to get for the 20th anniversary this year is going to be more of the same old charge system. I've had this problem with Muso for a long time. There's always the people that they say that Muso has never changed. It's always just been mindless button mashing, and that's only partially true. I do feel like the games have gotten progressively easier to the point where they're like completely devoid of challenge, which is why I mostly do like exhibition stuff in Muso games. That way, I still get some challenge out of them. Warriors Orochi 4 is a really easy game, besides the cheap stuff like the one shots from the Griffins and stuff. But it's a really fun game to exhibition in, and that's kind of how I infuse challenge into that game, even though the actual challenge of the enemies is basically non-existent if you have a good grip on the mechanics. My problem with Muso is that they have like this abusive relationship with their mechanics. They keep going back to the charge system. That they've had legit good ideas. Dynasty Warriors 6 was panned just as much, if not more, than Dynasty Warriors 9. But that game actually had some pretty cool ideas too. That was the first Dynasty Warriors game to have universal defensive uh, mechanics. Like you had guard and dodge canceling. The combat actually felt quite good in that game. It's just the problem was the Renbu system was basically, turning Muso into what all the haters say it is, which is just mashing on the square button. That's pretty much all Dynasty Warrior 6 was. And, I didn't like the game that much. I did play it as much as I could, but I kind of hope that they would maybe iterate on that and, maybe improve it. Not mechanics don't have to be figured out completely on the first time, but instead, like I said, they did their whole abusive relationship thing where they keep going back to the charge system. And I remember when Dynasty Warriors 7 was announced about 10 years ago. They did like a conference, like a live conference, and people were cheering when they brought back the charge system. I was like kind of split on that. I feel like they threw out all that work. A lot of those movesets did not come back. Some of them, like the pinwheel and stuff, only just came back in Dynasty Warriors 8, which is only a couple years ago. They threw out all those designs, all those mechanics and stuff. Like even the defensive mechanics and stuff did not come back until Dynasty Warriors 9, which is like a decade later. Um, I feel like they don't realize that when you try to change too many things in one installment, it generally does not go well. There's been a lot of games, a lot of ancient franchises that have tried to change things, just drastically in one installment, and it very rarely goes well. You have exceptions like Sengoku Basara 3, which granted came with a lot of sacrifices. They had to cut out like half the cast, and it took them about 5 years to put everybody back in. But the combat was completely overhauled. It's definitely still some of the best combat in the genre by far. But and you have things like Call of Duty 4 as well. Call of Duty 4 was a pretty big change. Obviously, it's still an FPS, but they completely ditched the tired World War II setting, and they went completely into, at the time, what was modern technology and things. And those are some exceptions, but you have plenty of things like Dynasty Warriors 6 and Dynasty Warriors 9. Also, the new Paper Mario is a good example. That game is incredibly divisive because they turned all the random battles into puzzles, and the game is like super slow paced. You know, some people like it, but some people don't, and that series is definitely a good example of how people actually want them to go back to the old thing, but they keep trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm not really sure what will happen at this point. I don't feel like the open world needs to be thrown away. I feel like the problem was that they just don't have the budget to make a good open world. Like, I'm gonna go ahead and cut over to my Discord here. I put a good discussion in there. Yeah, turn this on. What's up, Grow? He's about to make a video about this too. Anyway, Swillow said, I don't even know how they even mess up Muso, to be honest, when they have so many successful material to reference. Even if they want to try new things, it's not hard to fall back on a proven solid foundation in the process of introducing new things. No, I said, it's likely a combination of fighting for higher budgets and not getting approved for them, and suits pressuring the developers to change too many things in a single installment. That has almost historically never worked in any video game franchise outside the things I just mentioned. I went ahead and mentioned Paper Mario as well. You know, some of these new ideas would work well in a new IP, but not in an ancient franchise. And that's kind of the weird thing about Muso as well. They tend to introduce a lot of new mechanics in the franchise Muso games, but they never make it into the mainline ones. And I think part of that is because they use the franchise games to experiment. But the problem is that the mainline games, especially Dynasty Warriors, it's not as much of an issue with Samurai Warriors. I think Samurai Warriors is quickly approaching having like half the characters of Dynasty Warriors now. They just can't really make any drastic changes without having it be a massive just manpower undertaking because of they have like almost 100 characters in the game now, which is why I find it odd that they're already talking about scrapping everything again. It's just like mind-boggling to me. They didn't even make like half of the characters have a unique move set even after the DLC. I think they just barely got there, if I remember correctly. And now it seems like they're implying that they're just going to scrap all that again. Then I mentioned AAA open world games with 100 times the budget are still barren and full of basically nothingness. Dynasty Warriors 9 never had a chance. That's something we need to realize too. Is you look at Ubisoft games and they have like the illusion of having a bunch of stuff in the open world, but in reality, a lot of it is just useless trinkets and just having a massive checklist of stuff to do, which a lot of people say now stresses them out. It feels too much like being an adult and having to do errands. Get in the car or the bus or train and go do groceries and pay bills and stuff. And people are kind of getting tired of that stuff. But you realize that those games have such a massive budget compared to anything Dynasty Warriors has ever done, and they can't even pull off an open world in a good way. Dynasty Warriors 9 just never really had a chance. I feel like the combat is quite good. I mean, it's not great. The game is definitely devoid of challenge, like most Muso games are. It's just that the move sets are small, and it does really lose its luster quite quickly. However, I was really excited to see what they could do with that system, after they've decloned most of the characters and added more mechanics and moves to it and stuff. I think it would have been quite fun, but now it seems like they're gonna go back to the same thing again, and I really hope that's not true. And I said right here, Dynasty Warriors has the partially incorrect stigma of being the same thing for ages that they tried to change it several times. The problem is that they keep pulling 180s to the ancient and outdated charge system instead of allowing themselves time to iterate on the new mechanics, Renbu, state combo system, etc. The new ideas are not given time to grow and improve because for some reason they keep discarding their work and go back to the combat they created 20 years ago. Part of me feels like the mainline Muso stuff is on the back burner because their franchise games sell way more. They're also free of having to change things for 90 plus characters and can start from scratch. That's definitely an element too. You look at stuff like Pirate Warriors 4. That game has no clones, but ironically, a lot of the characters play the same just because of how homogenized the mechanics are. But they're still experimenting with things like air combos and air dashes and having active moves. And I think those are really cool mechanics. It's just that, in that game, it kind of has the same problem Dynasty Warriors 9 does, where it's the first time they've done anything like that, and there's just not a lot of time to really look at the mechanics, see what works, see what doesn't, and improve on it in future installments. Also, there's the problem that they threw out a lot of what worked with Pirate Warriors 3, and the game was kind of worse off in a lot of reasons. You can't dodge offset in Pirate Warriors 4 at all, which makes the combat feel more stiff because it's kind of like old charge system games where you have to go through like 5 or 6 charge attacks to get to what you want. Anyway, that's basically all I had to say. I hope that they'll come to a good compromise at least. I really don't want to go back to the charge system. I don't want to see, the same Zhao Yun C3 EX for the 10,000th time. I really want them to take a new idea and stick with it. Actually, I mentioned a couple other things here. Let me scroll down here. They need to take one of these ideas and stick with it. Just because it's not perfect in one installment doesn't mean it needs to be thrown away. Constantly crawling back to the charge attack system like an abusive relationship is not helping. I definitely agree with what I said there. I feel like the charge system is really old. It's really holding the system back. It's really holding the franchise back generally, and it's a shame that they keep having good ideas like making things more freeform and open-ended and having more direct control over when you can use certain moves, but then just wanting to go back just because Dynasty Warriors 9 was poorly received. It's really a shame. Then I mentioned here, like, look at the Tails LMBS. They've added a ton to that system for decades, and it was really good when it peaked. Ironically, when they tried to deviate from it with art trees is when the quality diminished. Tails games aren't super good, consistent quality either, but at least good ideas aren't thrown away as much as mainline Musou. You may remember when Tales of Graces came out. That game was quite divisive. It did have some cool things like the dodge offsetting and the around step were really nice. They felt really nice to pull off, but you lost a lot of your freedom because everything was stuck in a tree and you couldn't do things when you wanted anymore. It's kind of feels like how the charge system is in Musou. And Tales of Zestiria was the second game to use the art tree, and that was even more limiting because you had even less moves, and then they had the fusion mechanic to kind of shoehorn you into using it even more, and it just felt like a lot of your options were gone. And Tales of Berseria, as much as I don't really like the art tree, that game definitely did it in the right way. You could configure the art tree very similarly to how you could in God Hand. You had complete freedom over it, and that made the game feel quite a bit better. And they also had the shortcut system as well, so you could get to things instantly without having to dodge, offset, or get to the end of a string. But instead of discarding a lot of ideas in the LMBS, they actually iterated on it for many years, about 20 years now, actually, 25 years, actually. And that's why those games have had a lot of good ideas. They definitely have discarded some good stuff over the years, but I think in general, they created something good and they stuck with it and they actually improved it over time. Obviously, there's been a lot of pressure to innovate. That's something that happens in general when you have an ancient franchise. It's been around for 20 or more years. There's always suits breathing down your neck to innovate things. But I think the problem is just trying to change too many things in one installment. That's just something that has never really worked. And it seems like we may be in for more of that again with Muso. I hope that that's not the case, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's it for now. I just thought I'd discuss this. I don't know how many of you follow Black Kite, but he generally translates a lot of stuff for the niche Japanese game community. I'm really glad that he went ahead and translated this. I guess this basically means that the 20th anniversary stuff is going to be more of the same, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. I don't really know what to expect. Maybe they're going to do like a Muso Stars 2 or something. 20th anniversary kind of implies that it will be Dynasty Warriors, but it may be something that just encompasses all Muso as well. Muso Stars had a pretty decent roster. There were some characters I didn't like. I didn't like all the lollies and the Dead or Alive characters, but they had really cool stuff in there, like William from Neo and the Tokiden characters. Mainly because not being shackled by having like 95 characters definitely helped them to kind of mess with the system a little bit more. The problem was that the game was just dumbed down. It didn't have a lot of depth. It wasn't really fun to play for long periods of time. If they do something like that, which I imagine is probably what will happen, since it doesn't seem like they can churn out a Dynasty Warriors 10 anytime soon. And as we see here, he's basically considering making a Dynasty Warriors 9 too. So I mean, it's not even like in the planning stages yet. Also, we have to consider this is the end of the console generation, and the PS4 in general has just had pretty terrible performance for Muso games. They've been like barely 30 FPS. I remember when I had played the Japanese version of Warriors Orochi 4 thanks to a friend. before I got my copy, and the frame rate was legit making me sick. I hope that maybe they'll put this generation of Musou games to rest sooner than later. I definitely think the next generation is really going to help Musou. Ironically, people don't like how simple the graphics look in Musou. They're definitely not the kinds of games you play for graphics, but the ironic thing about it is that they're some of the most demanding games to play because there's just so many characters on the screen. There's so many particle effects and so many things that need to be processed at the same time. They're very CPU heavy games, and I definitely would like to see them move away from the PS4. It seems like the PS4 just has a, well, actually, I know that it has a very weak CPU, and it just wasn't really cut out for Muso games. We haven't really had a console Muso game that's really taken advantage of the hardware, or any hardware that's actually been able to handle it quite well. Even the PS4 Pro versions of the games tend to run uncapped, and pretty much they only run capped on PC. So I'm definitely interested in the next generation of Muso. I just hope I'm not in for another 20 years of charge attacks because I'm not getting any younger. I've been around since the beginning. This account is as old as the site itself. I have I have stuff dating back to the PS2 era on here. I don't want to feel like I'm just doing the same thing for another decade. I hope that they'll really take the feedback to heart. They need to look at what works with these new mechanics that they're doing and improve on them and stop throwing them away. It's kind of like people who don't recycle their bottles and stuff. It's like you get money for it. You get money for recycling in some parts of the country. You should do it. And even if you don't, you should do it anyway because it doesn't hurt you and you're saving the planet. That's kind of what's happening here is they've been so wasteful with their new ideas, and they just kind of they feel like a game company that can't take constructive criticism. They get shut down once and they just go back to what works. And I think that's what's really hurt the Muso series over the past two generations is just trying to reinvent the wheel, but trying to do too much in one installment and then not taking the feedback to heart and then just going back to what works, even though it's so ancient and outdated and it just doesn't really function as well as it used to because they're trying to kind of patchwork in new mechanics onto something that dates back to almost 1999. Anyway, that's it. Go ahead and post your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.